Welcome, game dev adventures, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Gabe Cornish about freeware game development, the antidote to burnout.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
Welcome, everybody, to our live magical podcast. Here at the Indie Game Lunch Hour, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly asking them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a mostly unedited live recording we host in our Discord every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so feel free to swing by and join us for the next one. There are links to join down below. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster here at the Indie Game Academy and the self-proclaimed Purple Wizard of Games. I am really excited to be joined once again for the second time on the show by Gabe Cornish. Gabe is a game designer in the industry who rejects the niche version of the game industry that we're now moving into, although if he had to, he would pick narrative design. He also happened to be a game designer with me over at Paradox Interactive while we were working on Life by You. Gabe is excited today to talk about freeware game dev, which is something we haven't really talked about before, and also how to avoid burnout. Gabe, welcome to the show. I'm very excited to chat. What are you having for lunch today?
I'm on the West Coast in California, so I'm actually having breakfast, but
Nice.
I'm having a latte and a blueberry muffin, which I'm not going to eat during the podcast, so it's just going to sit here and stare at me until we're done. So great, great practicing willpower here. That's from my local cafe.
Beautiful. If you want, we could go a couple minutes over just to really give you a lot of that willpower practice.
I'm going to start sweating by the end of the podcast, like just totally distracted by this blueberry muffin.
Yeah, everyone who's live in the podcast right now, in the Discord right now, count the number of times Gabe glances at the muffin for me. I'm very curious.
Yeah, we'll get a total.
Absolutely. So as always, Gabe, we like to start with origin stories. We, a lot of people here are looking to break into the game industry either in their own way or for an existing company. So we're always curious about those origin stories. So Gabe, tell us about how you got to where you are today and how you broke into games.
Yeah. I started making games in college towards like my senior year. I had a couple friends that were making Flash games and they were making like money from it, and I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. I love video games. I think it was also right around the time like Indie Game the movie came out, like Vlambeer was taking off with like indie game development, and I was just like really inspired by all of it. So I just started making games. Most of them were just freeware games, kind of silly little projects that I would put on the internet and see if anybody would respond to them. And I made a lot of them. And eventually they kind of got noticed and job opportunities started to come up, and I just kind of followed that path. It's always helpful, like when you're going into like an interview and you're like, oh yeah, like, I've made like, 20 games this year or something like that. Anyways, I just kept making games until someone gave me a shot, and then that kind of the rest was history. Or at least that's how I broke in. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the first shot when you said somebody gave me a shot? What was it?
It was a friend of mine that was working at a company called SGN, which later rebranded to Jam City. We had gone to college together. He was actually one of the people that I knew that had been making Flash games. They got like a deal with Armor Games or something for a game that they had made, and I just thought they were so cool. Anyways, hit me up. He said, "Hey, we have a game design position open. You should apply for it." And I applied, and I think he helped just get the resume to the top of the stack, so that the hiring manager would actually look at it. And then I got a screening call. Just the kind of the usual, right? You get a screening call, and then you go in for an interview, and then you cross your fingers and hope that they're going to take a shot on you.
Yeah. That's awesome. I didn't realize. So you were buddies then, or at least knew the original founder of Jam City? Is that what you just said?
Oh, no. One of my friends at college had gotten a job as a designer at Jam City.
Got it. Okay. Nice.
And he was the one that gave me a heads up that they were looking for someone.
Yeah. Yeah, as always, this is something that gets repeated basically every episode of this show, or 90% of the time. Those first jobs are often through networking more so than just cold applying to any position. Cold applying works, don't get me wrong. The stat that I always hear is about 80% are by referral. So, 1 out of 5 times you'll still potentially get hired via cold application. But networking, knowing the right people, having somebody who's there to bat for you is such a huge part of how you get placed in this industry. So don't sleep on it. Go talk to people. I know y'all are nerds and introverts. I am too. Go talk to people anyway. You don't need to be good
Yeah,
at it. Just start talking.
yeah.
Something that I've always loved about you, Gabe, and that I've always respected about you is the just start making games mentality. I love that there was like no hesitation. You were like, maybe games is good. And then the next sentence out of your origin story was, so I started making games. Um, and for anyone who doesn't know Gabe professionally, that is still true to this day. Gabe would, while we were working at Paradox together, Gabe would show up on a Monday and we'd be chatting about what we did over the weekend. And he'd be like, oh, yeah, I went and did a game jam. So, Gabe is now like a tenured designer in the industry with a bunch of professional experience, but he's still just making games. So, anyone who doesn't know where to start, just make games. Just do it.
Yeah. It's funny, like that advice is it's it's so simple, and you
Yeah.
sometimes you feel like it needs to be more complicated than that, but it
Mhm.
really isn't.
It really
Yeah,
isn't.
just go make games.
Just gonna make games.
And I think
There's like a, yeah, no, go ahead.
I don't know, and then more importantly, have fun making games. Like I think that that's the unspoken thing, right? Because like we hear so much like games are hard, blah blah blah. It's like, well, yeah, but so is Dark Souls, right? Like, but we
Still
don't see
worth it.
people burning out off of Dark Souls, right? Like, yeah, it's hard, but it
I
should
don't
be
know.
fun too.
I'm kind of burnt out on Dark Souls, on
Yeah,
Elden
okay,
Ring specifically.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, yeah, I love it. No, I think you're totally right. It's interesting. I will never have a full perspective on starting in the game industry during the current strife that we're in because I, of course, started before all this happened. But that said, I still started, and many people like you, Gabe, still started around a time where we had a different problem, which was not that there were so many people trying to break in, but that actually there were so few, kind of that games just weren't well established or well respected yet. And that kind of had its own issues. But something that's been true since the get go and is still true now is that in general, the way that you get started in games is that you get started on your own. And it doesn't have to be complicated, it doesn't have to be big, just like Gabe is suggesting. Just like pick something that sounds kind of interesting to make and go for it. Some of my very first games, and in fact, the game that even made me realize that games are commercially viable that I sold to addictinggames.com was just me making a game based on the code that I knew how to do. And at that point in time, the only thing that I knew how to do was go to and play a specific frame in Flash ActionScript. So I made an entire game using a single line of code, which was just to go to a specific frame, and it all functioned and was even pretty fun. So you don't need to, yeah, you don't need to get too complicated with it. Just make games.
yeah, yeah. I really like that. I think kind of the underlying theme there is make the game that you can make, right?
Hmm.
In the beginning, the game that you might be able to make is just Pong, and that's okay. Just make Pong, but add something to it or remove
Yeah.
something or remix it a little bit, right? Because that's the game that you can make. Um, and then the more you make the game that you can make, it's kind of like little Lego bricks, right? You pick up little tricks and things like that, and then the games get kind of a little bit more complicated,
Hmm.
or more nuanced or more intricate. But yeah, just make what you can make.
Yeah. That's honestly a wonderful quote. Make the game that you can make. I think maybe this was never a problem that I personally ran into, but I think some people definitely um, like overscope. I mean, what am I saying? I've always run into that problem. But they try they try to build something that they can't make. So man, my dream game is to make my own MMO where X, Y, and Z happens. And MMO is kind of the stereotypical overscoped example. But still, people will try to build something that's outside of their boundaries. In some ways, that's great because it pushes you outside of your boundaries and you learn a bunch of new stuff. But one of the real killers is just trying to build something that's so big that you'll never finish it. That happens to so many
Mhm.
people. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you, Gabe. So instead, if you just focus on what you can make and reduce your scope and bring it down to like, okay, I know how to do X, Y, and Z. not quite sure about this other part of the game, but I think I can probably figure that out. And then build in that space instead of the grand aspirational space. I think you tend to learn a lot more and you tend to finish games, which is also very important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you're just starting out, over scoping or making something that is hugely ambitious is probably a good thing too, in the sense that
Mhm.
it quickly shows you what you can't do, right? It's kind of like if you've never worked out a day in your life and then you go into the gym and you see like, a 300, pound like bench press and you try to press it, you immediately get that feedback like, oh no, I can't do this. Maybe I should start with lower weight, right? But it's, unless you experience that for yourself, right? Like, um, it's kind of hard to gauge what an
Yeah.
appropriate scope for your skill level is. So you kind of have to like, yeah, you just kind of have to just
Fail.
just get it wrong a couple times, and then so long as you're humble about it and you're kind of willing to accept like, okay, yeah, maybe I do need to scope smaller, and maybe I need to scope even smaller, and maybe I need to scope to an embarrassingly small amount. Um, that's still fine because you're finding a weight.
Mhm.
Metaphorically, you're finding a gym weight that is appropriate for your skill level, and then
Yeah.
you do that one enough, you're going to get stronger and start
Yeah.
leveling up.
Yeah. It's a really good point, actually. Failure is, we know this, we've heard this from a million different gurus. Failure is a part of learning, very much so. So maybe it's a good thing for you to go try to make an MMO and then not be able to, because you do learn so many lessons that way too. But let's
Yeah.
get to the topic of the episode. So we agreed that today we'd be focusing on freeware game dev, the antidote to burnout. And I would actually like to start in the second half of that statement, which is just burnout. And we basically define burnout, talk a little bit about what you've been feeling, what the industry might be feeling, um, and yeah, what that's been like.
Well, Willem, I'm so glad you asked, because I don't know if you've noticed, but the game industry right now is kind of tough. It's been pretty tough on game developers. Um, yeah, I think there are a lot of game developers, whether you're trying to enter into the game industry,
Mhm.
whether you're in the game industry, or whether you've recently been laid off. Um, I think, at least from what I've been seeing, there's a lot of burnout. And there's a lot of developers out there that are either um, dissatisfied, or kind of disillusioned, or demoralized with
Yeah.
the process of making video games. And yeah, that's tough, right? Like that's not great for a workforce.
Yeah.
And I think the underlying challenge there is that game development is ruthlessly competitive, right? And I would say commercial game development is ruthlessly competitive. And just by its nature, that ruthless type of competition, that intense type of competition, is going to put downward pressure on developers.
Mhm.
Um, and to make things, I don't want to say worse, but to kind of compound the issue, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Mhm.
Games have always been competitive, and I think they will continue to always be competitive. And therefore, the unfortunate truth is, as developers, we need to find ways to adapt to that environment, in a way that is healthy and in a way that gets us moving through the industry intact, and
Mhm.
and ensures some level of well-being. Um, and so I think, to go back to your question about, what is burnout, I think burnout can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I think the red flags are usually, when you're starting to feel stressed, when you're starting to feel apathy over the project. You're kind of like in that state of mind of like, I'm working on this thing, but it feels helpless, right?
Yeah.
Um, or You've just come off of like a couple week vacation and you're feeling good, and then after the first day back at work you're like, I'm already burnt out again. Like that's another kind of sign. And I think it's common. Like I think there's a lot of developers out there that have gone through that or are currently going through that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's I do a couple of calls with people who are trying to break in every week to kind of keep myself relevant and understand what people are going through. And one of the feelings I've been receiving more and more lately is essentially hopelessness, which is a bit of what you're talking about. And it sucks. It just hurts. It's like a really disappointing thing to have all of these wonderful, excited, like energetic juniors be put in a place where they're like, man, I don't know if I'll ever find work. And then
Right.
even those who are in the industry, there's all this pressure that those who have not yet found work may not quite understand yet or feel yet, where the pressure is like, I better do good or I'm going to get dropped out and then be screwed trying to find another job again. Um, and the like constant, almost PTSD of like, man, layoffs could happen any day now. So all that kind of sucks. It is hypothetically maybe getting better, but there's definitely going to be, at least a year yet, probably more like 2 years where we're still sort of recovering. And yeah, so we got to find ways to cope and to continue to grow and to continue to do what we love, even in the face of studying kind of crappy. Which brings us to freeware game dev, which is interesting. I don't think we've ever discussed this as a topic on the show before. So, Gabe, start by telling me what freeware game dev is, and then tell me how it will solve all of my problems and make me happy and make life good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Freeware game development is great. I will stand on top of a mountain and scream it out forever till till the day I die, because I genuinely think it's the thing that has helped me get through all of the challenging times in the game industry. Um, yeah, I mean, you touched on it. Like even now, like people trying to enter the game industry. Entering the game industry has always been hard, but I can't even imagine what it's
Yep.
like for juniors right now. Like it's got to be really tough. And in the meantime, like you know, if if you're kind of gated on, okay, well, I can only work on games if I get a job in the game industry, like that doesn't sound great, right? Like, um, so freeware game development, as I define it, is essentially making a game that costs $0 to make and putting it out there with the goal of making $0. So you break even. Um, and you do it on a deadline that's fixed. Um, Essentially, you don't delay the games that you're working on. Um, And just if you just follow kind of those two rules, right? Like you are going to have a blast. You're going to have so much fun making video games. You're going to feel good. You're going to feel
Hmm.
confident. You're going to start building up a portfolio. You're going to start making more games than you ever thought you could make in a year. Um, and you're going to hone your craft. You're going to be putting games out there for other people to play. So you're going to be getting feedback from other players. You're going to be engaging and finding audiences. You're essentially giving a gift to the or to the gaming community because it's
Hmm.
free, no strings attached. You're not asking for anything. You're not asking for money. You're not doing ad revenue. You're nothing, right? Like it's just a win-win-win all around. You get to make the thing that you want to make how you want to make it. There's zero risk of it getting canceled. And the most beautiful part about it is it can slot into your life no matter how chaotic your life is,
Yep.
because the requirements to develop a freeware game don't have to be crazy. You don't have to crunch. You don't have to you know, um, kind of turn your life upside down. You can work on your game as little or as much as you want, um, so that it naturally adjusts to whatever your unique situation is. Um, I almost like can consider it like the meditation of game development, right? You just kind of do it in the background. You just do it throughout your career,
Hmm.
um, and it's only upside. That's it.
Yeah. I love that. Nick V in the comments here says, "I unironically love the confidence behind I'm giving a gift to the gaming community." That really is a beautiful sentiment, Gabe. When I do game jams, um, I do them, or when I do, I guess, freeware game dev, if we're expanding the term beyond game jams, I'm usually doing it just because I'm like super pumped about an idea and I just want to work on it and I don't care about anything else. So that's my motivation. But I love the motivation of this is something that I'm making for somebody else, that I'm making for the community. And I don't care if I'm getting paid. I'm actually not going to charge for this. It's just to try to get somebody to like make somebody's day. Like, that's really beautiful. And then you're getting much more pragmatic value out of it as well. You're getting skill building. You have something to add to the portfolio. It's interesting. Like well, as you get further into your career, those smaller games and game jams and things like that matter less on the portfolio because typically people are going to look at the big companies you've contributed to,
Mhm.
but they still totally matter. Like if you're in an interview and somebody asks about an example of you working on some specific skill or some specific tool, and you have the ability to say, "Oh, actually, I did a game jam where I focused on just that," is super helpful as well. Like that counts. A lot of people will count that. So I think there's a lot. Like you're giving us a lot of perspective into just the really sort of meditative, altruistic reasons to do it, and then also some of the more pragmatic, skill building, etc. reasons to do it. I think is wonderful.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think,
yeah,
yeah, game jams are like the ultimate freeware game development, right? Like essentially that's kind of what we're talking about here is game jams. Game jams have a problem, but like we can maybe get into that later. Um,
yep.
but yeah, I mean, if you ask any developer, like what's the most fun you've ever had working on a game, it usually comes back to a game jam. Like, and I love this because sometimes I talk to my developer friends that work at other companies. I'm like, hey, how's it going? And they're just like, oh my gosh, you have no idea. It's so crazy. Like, I don't know, I don't know how I'm gonna get through this project or whatever. Uh, they they like list off all of these things, but then as soon as you ask them, like, hey, like, do you remember that one time we did that game jam? Like, all of a sudden they just like light up and they're like, oh yeah, it
Yeah.
was awesome and it had this and we did this and like, and it's like in a lot of ways that game jam was probably a lot like more crunch intensive, but like for whatever reason it was a blast, right? And so
Mhm.
that's kind of like the first clue that freeware game development is a source of joy. Just look at how much
Huh.
fun people have doing game jams.
I love this as a perspective. So I am constantly because we've got the Indie Game Academy now, and we teach people, and we've got certain processes that we go through. I am constantly trying to place information that I learn into that process, and this immediately makes me go, "Huh, maybe freeware dev needs to somehow be a part of the process, or at least taught about in our sort of three-level curriculum." Because it is really true. My favorite moments in game dev period are game jams. I passing out on the floor of Google HQ during one of their global game jams is like one of my favorite moments of my
Yeah,
entire
yeah,
life, let alone game dev. Yeah.
yeah,
And not trying to make
yeah.
money, not trying to place or anything, just like this seems cool, and then making a game.
Yeah, it really doesn't get that much. It doesn't get better than that, to be
I
honest.
don't think it
Like,
does.
and it's funny because, like, sometimes you'll see like someone who does a game jam and they had a lot of fun, and they're like, "Oh yeah, maybe I do want to make it. Maybe I want to join the industry." And I'm like, "My sweet child, this is as good as it gets." Uh, no, but like, I mean, the thing is, like, if you're intent on working in the game industry, right? Whether it's indie, whether it's AAA, AA, whatever, um, the majority of your career is going to be spent making games for money. Like
Yeah.
that's commercial game development, and usually it's not a choice between, oh, do you want to be AAA or indie or whatever. Like that's really a choice of like what better suits your quality of life or your working environment and stuff. At the end of the day, they're both commercial game development, and they both have to play by the same rules, right? Like there's a lot of competition, sometimes even more so in indie game development. And indie game development can be even more stressful than AAA game development because everything is on the line, especially if you're
Yeah.
putting your life savings into it.
There is no
Um,
backup plan.
yeah, there's no backup plan. Like, and so like if you've made a conscious decision to work in the game industry, which is great. I want more people working in the game industry. Um,
Mhm.
you just got to know what arena you're stepping into. Commercial game development is an arena, and if you're planning to be in that arena for your career for the rest of your life, you better suit up with some pretty good body armor, because it's always going to be a challenge. It's always going to be difficult. And I think freeware game development is that body armor. It's the thing that is going to kind of keep you going. It's the thing that's going to kind of continue to light that fire when things feel, grim or dim or whatever. But it's also going to make the good times in your game career, the times where things are going well and you do feel stable and secure and all that, it's just going to like magnify that even more. It's just, yeah, it's a practice that it is always giving back to you.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So here's a question then. Let's expand on freeware game dev and what exactly it means. So you gave us the definition sort of $0 invested, $0 in revenue. Um, for myself, this is partly just because of time, trying to find time for stuff. Whenever I do freeware game dev, it's almost always an established game jam. I'm joining Ludum Dare, or I'm joining, the Global Game Jam, or I'm joining something on itch. I extremely rarely these days just like make a game and like put aside a month to build something and release it. And if I do that, by the way, I often monetize it. So I'm curious, like, is that true for you? When you do freeware game dev, are you joining a jam of some sort, or are you just making a game unaffiliated with anybody and you're giving yourself some time box or something like that?
Yeah. So I have a few different outlets for freeware game dev.
Mhm.
And the thing is, like, it doesn't really matter that much, so long as the core principle is you're making a game on $0 and you're releasing it with the goal of making $0.
Mhm.
So sometimes I'll just be browsing itch and be like, hey, what game jams are going on? And sometimes one speaks to you, and sometimes there's just nothing, right? You're just like, none of these are I'm not really jazzed about any of it. In that case, I'm just like, okay, well, maybe I will just make my own game jam, a game jam of one, right? Like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to set the deadline to 2 months, and I'm going to pick a theme, right? You can randomly pick it, or if there's a theme in your mind that you really want to pursue, just pursue it, right? Like, this is the point, right? You get to do whatever you want.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, so you can just give yourself a game jam. Or I am a part of a community called Home Team Game Dev. It's a community of freeware game developers, and we all kind of help each other make games. I think we have Tyler in the audience, another Home Team Game Dev. Shout out to Home Team, right? Doing great things over there. Yeah, I think actually Tyler right now is working on a freeware game. And that one is nice because you're working with other people, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so it really just kind of depends on the vibe that you're going with. Do you want to make a solo project? Do you just want to do something on your own? Do you want to join a game jam and make games alongside other people? That's a different experience. Or do you
Mhm.
want to collaborate with friends? And it's like, hey guys, we're gonna make a game. We're all going to work on it and we'll release it together, and we're going to release it for free. So we don't have to worry about revenue share or signing contracts or, all that other stuff. Um,
Mhm.
but really, I think that that $0 to make and with the intention of making $0 really just opens up the creative freedom and possibilities to kind of really just do whatever you want.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't done one of the restrictions of a game jam. There's a couple of restrictions that come with a game jam. Number one, um, game jam teams fall apart like all the time,
Mhm.
and so that's sort of its own weakness. Versus finding a couple people that you already really know and trust and work well with, it's much less likely for that to fall apart, and you tend to get better work out of it. So that's already a reason to potentially not do a jam. The other thing is jams always have restrictions. They always have rules, and at the very least, they're going to have some kind of theme. And so you're
Mhm.
sort of forced into coming up with an idea for that jam. So I think part of what I'm hearing is when you have a concept that you're just excited to work on, maybe it's time for you to do that game jam of one, where you just build something because, like, dang, that sounds cool. I would love for that to exist.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, yeah, like you got to vibe with the game jam first. Like, don't join a game jam that you're not excited to join. I think
Yeah.
that kind of defeats the purpose. Um, and there could be like a ton of reasons why you want to join a game jam. Some game jams are raising money for
Mhm.
for a good cause or whatever. But yeah, like make sure you vibe with it. as far as like, one of the solves, yeah. So you mentioned one of the problems of game jams, and there's actually a couple of problems with game jams. Like one of them is, yeah, like teams fall apart, which is why I always recommend if you're going to do a game jam with a team, right? Make sure that you can finish the game on your own, right? So at the very worst, at the very least, if everybody in the team like drops out, you can still finish the game. So don't scope for more than a single person, and all the extra help that you get is just like kind of a bonus.
Gravy on top. Yeah.
Yeah. The other problem with game jams, and I've started to encounter this because I have a son now, and I have I have a wife and family and responsibilities, and all of the things that adulthood brings. I can't do a Ludum Dare, right? Like I don't just have like you know 3 days of just, I'll just work on this game full time for 3 days, right? Like it just doesn't exist anymore. It was great when I was young and had no responsibilities and could do whatever I want. It's a little different now. And so, one of the things that I try to encourage people is do game jams on a longer timetable, right? Do a 3-month game jam, right? All a game jam is at the end of the day, it's a theme and a deadline, and the deadline is fixed, right? And like that barrier to entry is like just, yeah, like that's it. Like that's all you need to get started is start with a deadline. How long am I going to work on this game for? Is it going to be a week? Is it going to be 2 weeks? Is it going to be 3 months? And then have kind of a direction that you want to go in, and then just go. And so for me, I find myself doing longer game jams, 3 months, or whatever, so that, life gets crazy and I don't have to like work on it full time, right? I can slot it into whatever works well for, whatever is going on in my life at the moment. Like at the moment right now, like I've recently been laid off, trying to look for a job, trying to apply for, health insurance, do all of that crazy stuff. I'm trying to take care of a son, like all of these things. But all that said, I am still on track to release a game today, right? So like this is proof that the process can work, no matter how crazy, no matter how hectic life can get. You can still slot this in and not feel stressed out about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that you say, giving 3 straight days to something is harder. You can't fit that into your life. For me, that's actually perfect because during the week, I've got a bunch of stuff going on, but in general, I keep my weekends sacred, and that's sort of a privilege that I have right now because I don't have a kid like you gave.
Right.
But therefore, I can give a weekend to a game, and that's actually easier and less stressful for me to just stay up all freaking weekend and make something awesome than it is for me to devote a couple of hours here and there for 3 months. But for you, the opposite is true, where a couple of hours every couple of days for 3 months is exactly what fits into your life schedule. So I think that the takeaway is like make a freeware game that fits the schedule, figure out a way that works for you and that you can work on the game. And I think really the biggest thing is like just set that release date and then hit it. It's really good practice. And if you need to push it back, obviously that's fine. But it's really good practice for you to actually launch a game when you say you're going to launch it. And it's just like less stress. You're not going to keep working on the thing for 6 years when you said it would take you 3 months. All right. I've taken enough of your time, Gabe. It's time for some community questions. So we've got Rick up on stage. Rick, would you like to ask your first question?
Hey, Gabe. So you were talking about burnout earlier, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on like what is that crux moment of burnout? The circumstances that lead up to the moment that somebody goes, "Crap, I'm feeling burned out," or I can tell that I'm burning out, and I've only got like 2 weeks left, right? Like what is it that leads up to that moment? Is it cultural? Is it the pressure to be creative faster than you really should be? Is it just not taking breaks? What is it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the answer is different for everyone. There's so many things that can occur, right? Like someone can feel burnt out not because of anything that they're doing creatively or the amount of work they have, but they're feeling burnt out because they are tired of not knowing whether they're going to have a job next week or not, right? Like that can contribute to burnout. Someone could be burnt out because they're on, this is their fourth Call of Duty game that they've worked on, and their whole career has just been one game, right? One franchise, right? and they just need to do something else. Um, Another can be chaotic work environment. It can be, too much work in, not in an unreasonable deadline. Like there's just so many things that come into play for what can cause someone to burn out. And I think what would cause me to burn out different than what would cause Willem to burn out, which would be different than what would cause you to burn out. The point is less, the cause of the burnout, though it is important to make sure that we talk about those openly so that we can, kind of demand and expect better work environments from our employers. But the truth is, it's going to come up at some point in your career. And when, or if and when it does, what is your plan, right? How are you going to take care of yourself? Because we we can't we can't rely on our employers to do that for us. Some will, some have better ways of doing it, and some are committed to making sure that their workforce is well taken care of. But it's not something that we can rely on, and so we kind of need our own tools to make sure that when when no one else is going to help us, we're going to help ourselves.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like, there are a few things that can be outside of your control, like the element of like, will I have a job, 2 weeks from now? Because game dev is very much like a gig project. But it sounds that what you're talking about is when you are just constantly pouring from a cup and you eventually wear your energy out. If you're not taking the time for self care, then that is problematic. And really, like maybe the employers need to offer a working relationship with the devs so that they can take the time to refill their cups.
Right. That, and also making sure that if the devs, or if the studios, or whoever you're working for fails to do that, you have a plan for it, right? Again, like making sure that you can rely on yourself to refill your cup, because that's the surest way that you'll be able to do that.
Yeah, it seems like so Rick, I know at least in part, why you're asking this question, and that is how to build process into your own studios to try to
Mm.
avoid burnout. What is the healthy what is the healthy way to do that? It sounds to me like part of the answer is that it's actually really hard to burn process in, and it's more about having a healthy response and iteration cycle when it happens. So there's obvious things we can do. We should be avoiding crunch as much as possible. A little bit of crunch is okay, but we should be adequately spacing out a roadmap so people aren't building everything last second. There's definitely things we can do as institutions, but it seems like more so it's about being open to hear when your team says, "Hey, I'm burnt out," and then having a process to recover when that does happen. Do you agree with that, Gabe?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think uh, also I know, like, this is driving home this message. I think looking to freeware game development practices can help you build better processes that avoid burnout, right? Like making sure that, like, if you're a studio head, or a game director, or whatever, making sure that, like, the theme right, like the direction is clear, right? Making sure that there are clear measurable milestones that you're trying to hit. Those, I think, go a long way, because when people know the objective, the target they're trying to hit, they can see themselves making progress towards that. And when you see yourself making progress towards a meaningful objective, then the risk of burnout becomes lower, right? It's when the objective is unclear, the timelines are unclear, you're kind of lost in a forest and you're not really sure where you're going or how to get out of it, or if there's even a plan to get out of it. Like those all kind of contribute um, to a team that is likely to be burnt out over time.
Yep, totally agree with that one. Well, Rick, you've got a second question, so while we've got you up here on stage, do you want to ask that one?
Yeah, so you're talking about the freeware game development and how it's just building projects according to your own rules. So we all have our ideas of like what game development should be. In the process of doing freeware, are there any of these standard development rules that you think you're breaking?
Hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding the question. Like,
So
what do you
like
mean by that?
So like when you're trying to build I'll give an example of like something that I think is breaking the rules. You get together with a group of people and your goal, normally you get together to jam and you're going to build the game. Well, what if you're just trying to solve a tech solution, right? You're just like, "Hey, listen, we found this cool tool. Let's figure out a pipeline to build this use of this tool into the game engine so we can achieve a really cool aesthetic," something like that.
Mhm.
Where your goal doesn't necessarily have to be building the game and the gameplay loop. It's building that awesome pipeline that you can then use later in a project that comes down the road.
Oh, got you. Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Like, it sounds
ultimately,
like just what's
oh
different
god,
from sorry. That sounds like it's just what's different from sort of a more standard or rote or professional game dev process when you're doing freeware. Is that right?
right.
What are
Yeah,
you
I
doing
mean, I
differently?
think, yeah, like if you I mean, yeah, if you're trying to set up a project to learn something, right, like a pipeline, or a new tech, or whatever, and you're using kind of a game jam, or freeware game dev as a way to do that, like that's totally fine. Like, it's essentially you're doing what you want to do, right? Which is, I think, essentially at the core of what's going to help you with the burnout or get over burnout. Because when you sit down and you're like, I want to do this thing, right? Like, and then you get to do that thing and you get to do it how you want to do it. That usually always feels good. And so whether it's actually making a game, or whether it's making, a prototype for a game, or, testing out, some kind of tool or something, like that all kind of fits under that category. Sorry, hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, it definitely did. I mean, just talking about that, I know that a lot of times what I'll do is I'll do like the more traditional game jams, one weekend, one week. And from doing those jams, you find people who have like really cool talents. And then, you just continue to talk and they say, "Oh, I would have always loved to try this." But then you just kind of
Mhm.
change what your end goal is just to
Mm,
to help them achieve that goal of what they wanted to try, whether it's this cool tech. They learned about this cool shape that can socket any number of ways and infinitely repeat. Let's build a tile-based game with that. Just testing mechanics and being creative and innovative.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you have a clear goal in mind and you have a clear deadline, um, then yeah, like just go for it.
Yeah, I think so. In the comments, Nick V says, "Example: not making choices to be marketable, but instead to be experimental." I think, especially from your definition, a $0 invested, $0 in revenue game, that's really part of also why it's a breath of fresh air. You're not trying to come up with a brilliant game. You're not trying to come up with something that people even want to play. You're just building something because you want to build it. I think that's really the primary rule that you're quote breaking there, Rick. It's like instead of doing the traditional thing where you're trying to figure out how to take a slice of the pie, you're just ignoring the pie. Screw the pie. I'm just gonna make a game.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that's why, the $0 invested trying to make $0 is so important, is because once you take money out of the equation, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with commercial game development. There's nothing wrong with money. I love money. I love putting food on my table and paying rent.
Yes.
Um, but when you're working on a game, when you take money out of the equation, you change the incentive, right? And the incentive is no longer tied to money. It could be tied to whatever it is that you're pursuing, whether it's to learn,
Mhm.
whether it's to get better at something, whether it's just like, hey, I have a cool idea. Nobody in, it's probably not marketable. Probably nobody will love it except for me. You should still have permission to do that. There's still value in making that thing, right? And so that's kind of what that rule kind of helps ensure.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. All right, so we probably have time for one more question if anybody wants to drop one in the chat. In the meantime, we're going to do the question of the day, which is where we reiterate one of the most important things we learned from the guest to help it sink in further. So, Sayafire, I see that you are asking to speak. I would love it if you would speak, but I got to see what your question is in the comments before I'm going to bring you up on stage. So please write out your question for me. So here is the question of the day. First person to answer it correctly in the comments will get 3 House Cup points. And the question is, what kind of games should you make? What game should you make? What game should you make? The games you can make. That was a pretty easy one. Yes, Beth from the comments got it correctly. Beth, let us know which house you would like to give those points to. Indeed, the game that you should make is the game that you can make. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck? A woodchuck could chuck wood. All right, final question of the day is going to be from Sayafire. Go ahead, Saya.
Hello, I wanted to say thank you guys so much so far for your expertise and advice. I'm brand new to the community, and this has already been so valuable. So my question is, as far as freeware games go, what does your idea generation process look like to create a small game that can actually show off your skills and strengths that will help build your portfolio?
Yeah, I love this question because one of the hardest things about freeware game development, and for me, I think it's really like the hardest thing, like more than implementation, all that kind of stuff, is staring at the blank page. Like that's crippling. So I start with a template, and that template is just a high level sentence of what kind of game I'm making, and the template goes verb in a noun while verbing, right? And if I can fill out like, a little Mad Lib style, then I'll have a concept for a game, right? So verbing could be like I don't know, shoot zombies in a spaceship while trying to escape, right? Like that's a concept for a game, and that's usually enough to get you to start thinking about, oh, okay, yeah, this is kind of what the game can be or whatever. So that's kind of my idea generation process: is start with the template, verb in a noun while verbing, fill in the blanks, and you have a high level concept that you can start like building off of. And right, if that concept doesn't excite you, you're like, nah. You can start tweaking it and iterating on it before you even get started on the game. Mm-hmm. And then once you get that feeling of like, oh yeah, this could be it. I can already see the wheels turning. Then that means that there's energy behind that idea, and if there's energy behind the idea, you're probably going to have a good time making it.
I love that as an answer. Does that answer your question, Saya?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. So will you do a few different sentences of a few different ideas, or you just try to take that one idea and make multiple iterations?
It depends, right? If it's like truly a blank canvas, then I'll just just spit out a bunch of sentences until one resonates with me. If I have kind of an idea for it, I think going through that template really helps me like clarify, like so that I can talk about it, right? Because I think one of the struggles is you have this idea, but it's too vague. You can't even put it into words. So perfecting that little, I don't know, I don't want to call it an elevator pitch, but like it's like a one-liner. Perfecting it really just helps bring clarity around what you're building.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So this is also this maybe flies in the face of the whole like purpose of freeware games, where it's much more loose. It's much more about just what you want to build. But Saya, if you want to get a little bit more formal, I'm always a big advocate for going down a funnel for when you're trying to choose what you're going to build. And my typical funneling steps are: first, basically, you define what the objectives are of this process. Then you ideate. You come up with as many concepts as you can that you could build. Then you use filtering steps, which is basically anything you can do that eliminates weaker concepts but doesn't require a full prototype. And then you prototype just the very best, a small handful, and then you pick your very favorite from that. That's my like sort of tried and true process myself if you want to get a little bit more formal. But I think the whole purpose of this talk is kind of like, I don't know, whatever the hell sounds fun. Awesome. All right. We are at the end of the episode here today. Before we say goodbye, we love to assign some homework every episode. So, Gabe, I'm putting you on the spot here. What is something that the audience can do in the next week or so that'll take them somewhere around an hour to practice some of what we talked about here today?
Yeah. So here's my challenge for you all. Make a game in 1 week. You have until midnight or 11:59 on Wednesday next week. Make a game, and follow a couple rules. Rule number one is make it for $0 and release it for $0. Rule number two is don't crunch. If you start to get that feeling of, oh my gosh, I don't have enough time to finish this game, the instinct is going to be to delay. Do not delay. Do the opposite, which is to cut scope, right? Like if you start to get that feeling like, ooh, like I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make it on time, or there's so much to work, start cutting. Just ruthlessly cut down. Even if you feel like the game ends up being way too simple or way undercooked or whatever, that's okay. We want to get in the habit of cutting scope, not delaying, because delaying is another thing that will lead to burnout. It's another thing that will lead to kind of being demoralized, right? So try to cut scope instead. And then last rule is have fun. Make the game that you want to make it how you want to make it, and enjoy yourself.
I love that. Yeah. Delaying also potentially leads to layoffs, is what I've heard.
Yes,
all right,
yes,
I love it.
And I would actually join you in on this challenge, but I am wrapping up a game today, which will be released. So I think I'm going to take a couple of days off before starting my next game.
That sounds
But
reasonable.
normally I would
If
have
you
just joined you in on this.
Heck yeah. If you send us the link to that, we'll include that down below. So if you're listening to this podcast later, check the description and there may be a link to Gabe's game. I love that. That's your homework. So in the next week between now, so depending on if you're listening to the recording, you've got a week from the time of hearing this, or if you're here live with us right now, you've got a week from today. So Wednesday the 7th will be your due date if you're here live. If you're listening to the recording later, set your own due date for this. You've got a week to make a game. Rule number one, $0 invested. Rule number two, release for $0. Rule number three, don't crunch. Rule number four, do not delay, cut instead. And rule number five, have fun. Gabe, I'm feeling like we should give them permission to make this a physical game if they wanted, like a board game or a sort of paper prototype, to make it a little bit more feasible for some folks. Does that make sense? Do
100%.
you feel like
Absolutely.
Sweet.
Yeah,
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So if you want to make yourself a little card game or something like that, that can be a ton of fun. Just put together a game. Do it for funsies. No other need for anything else. All right, fantastic. Gabe, before we say goodbye, is there anything you want to plug here or any last messages you want to give?
Yeah, if you're interested in having more fun, having a more sustainable way of working on video games or games in general, you can go to gabrielcornish.com. You can sign up for my newsletter. That's where I talk about freeware game development. That's where I give tips on how to just enjoy the process of making games more so that you can do it for a lifetime. Again, gabrielcornish.com. I think in the beginning, there's a newsletter sign up. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. I love talking about this. I love helping other people make more games and have more fun making games. Don't feel shy.
That's awesome. I didn't know you were working on that. That's a beautiful niche and sentiment. So go and follow Gabe on LinkedIn and go to his website and subscribe to his newsletter to learn how to enjoy making games, a very important thing during these dark days. Gabe, it's been a pleasure. It was great to chat again. And I can't wait to work on another game again together sometime soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Willem.
Absolutely. Of course. All right. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you again next week. As always, we'll be here Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. So there are links to join us down below. We'll see you next time. As always, we ask that you send this along to just one other person who may enjoy the episode, who is somebody else that can enjoy some Gabe goodness. Goodbye, y'all. We'll see you next week.